let's discuss registration of various investment advisors. So, with the National Securities Markets Improvement Act of 1996 and the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Act, basically there was a split between SEC or state registration, which, different from broker-dealers where they're actually triple registered, SEC, state, and FINRA, versus with advisors, it's either or, right? So there's generally three types of investment advisors. Let's just start with the exempt advisors or exempt reporting advisors. Those are essentially exempt from registration other than they just have to file Form ADV Part 1A. That's all they have to do, and even their employees are exempt from registration. But there's two rules that pertain to exempt reporting advisors. In order to be an exempt reporting advisor, you either you would only be advising venture capital funds, right? So, and there's no AUM limit on that if you're only advising venture capital funds. Or B would be you're advising private funds, which are 3C1, 3C7. That would encompass hedge funds, private equity, and VC funds. So if you're only advising them and the total AUM is less than 150 million in AUM, then you would be considered an exempt reporting advisor. And if you're 150 or above, you would actually have to be SEC registered. So let's just put that one to the side because the main concern is really state versus federal. And then there's a couple weird exceptions as well. So under federal rules, if you're only advising insurance companies, you're actually exempt from being an investment advisor. So, and thereby you actually don't have to register in the state either, because if on the state side, if you're only advising institutions, you don't have to register as an investment advisor. So that's sort of an interesting one. And the other interesting one is if you're exempt from the Investment Advisor Act of 40, which says that pretty much if you're only advising U.S. government securities, you don't have to register. That's one that also is kind of a weird one where, again, you wouldn't technically have to be an investment advisor. And then on the state level, federal rules reign supreme. So if you're not considered an advisor under the Investment Advisor Act of 40, you're not going to be considered an investment advisor under the Uniform Securities Act, even though there's no specific carve-out within the Uniform Securities Act. So let's just put those weird ones to the side, and let's discuss like the main differentiation points between state covered versus SEC covered. So on the in order to be SEC covered, there's going to be only two main rules. Number one, if you're over 110 million in AUM, or if you're advising an investment company. Now, I know we talked about the whole 150 million in AUM with the private ones. So let's just put that to the side. I'm talking about if you're not an exempt reporting advisor and you have more than 110 million in AUM, or you're advising an investment company. Doesn't matter how small your AUM is, you're going to be SEC covered, right? So just remember that when it comes to investment company, that encompasses many different things, right? So that can encompass 10 different words that I can think of. So number one would be obviously investment company. Number two would be face amount certificate. Number three would be unit investment trust. Number four would be management company, right? Those are all those terms mentioned under the Investment Company Act of 40, right? Then within the management company, under that umbrella, we have open-end funds, closed-end funds, right? And back then, the synonymous word for open-end fund was mutual fund, right? Then we also have ETFs that came out in the 90s, and some of them are UITs, the old-timey ones. Most of the new ones are open-end funds. Then we also have business development companies, which are a type of closed-end funds. Then we also have, on top of that, interval funds, which is a type of closed-end fund. So all of those would be characterized as investment companies, not REITs, just to reiterate that. And if you advise those, you have to be SEC registered. Now let's talk about the ones that can be either or. I call them the in-betweeners. So if you're between 100 to 110 million in AUM, you can choose to be SEC or state registered. You have the choice, right? That's different from forced to be SEC covered. This is either or. Now, another exception is if you can hit 100 million in AUM within 120 days, right? So let's say you're coming out the gate hot. You're planning on buying up other advisors and you're going to grow big. You can become immediately SEC registered if you want, right? And then remember, if you drop below 90, that's when you have to file ADVW and withdraw and become state covered. Another example would be, the third one would be if you're currently registered in 15 states or more, just from efficiency standpoint, no one wants to register in 20 states. You have the option to become SEC registered. Now, if you want to be registered in 25 states, God bless. You know what I mean? Go for it. The last one is sort of weird. If you're like a pension consultant and you're consulting on funds that are 200 million in AUM or more, that would you have the option of being either or, right? And then so I gave you the 2 that are SEC covered. I gave you the 4 that are in-betweeners. The remainder would just be kind of state covered, right? Would be state covered. And then remember, when it comes to the to actually registering with the states, if you're an investment advisor, you don't actually register with any state. You just notice file in states where you have an office or 6 or more retail clients, right? That would include accredited investors and stuff like that. So be careful with the word retail. And technically, the USA doesn't consider investment advisors to be institutional under the rule. So if you're a state-covered investment advisor, the same rules that apply to notice filing, it actually applies to registration on your side. So if you have an office or 6 or more retail, you have to register in those given states. And then on the IAR side, the individual that works for the IA, if you're working for a state-covered IA, it's pretty much the same rules. The only difference is it would be the office that you actually work out of, not just every office. You don't have to necessarily register in every office that your IA works out of. So you'd have to register if there's 6 or more, or if there's, or you work out of that office. And then the tricky one is if you're an investment advisor representative of a federally covered IA, the only place you'd have to register is the office you work out of, right? So if I work out of North Carolina, that's where I have to register. I don't care if I have 1,000 retail clients in South Carolina, I would not register in South Carolina. I would not register in South Carolina. And additionally, my company would have to actually notice file, right? Notice file just means you're pretty much paying a fee, presenting your ADV that you give to SEC, stuff like that. Pretty basic. Last point I was going to make, in terms of notifying the administrator. So if an IAR of a state-covered IA leaves to another company, then the state-covered, the onus is on the company. The onus is on the company to inform the administrator. Now, if it's an IAR of a federally covered IA, the onus is on the individual to notify the administrator. Now, in real life, the company will notify the administrator because they don't want to have you on the books, right? As if you're registered at the company when you no longer work there. But technically, the responsibility lies solely on you. So hope that makes sense, and have a great day.